The curtain stirred with a subtle flutter, just enough to draw my gaze. As I paused mid-sip of my morning coffee, my gaze locked onto the window of my new neighbor's house across the street. For a brief instant, I questioned whether it was merely a figment of my imagination. Yet again I caught sight of it, a shadow shifting behind the delicate fabric, gazing back at me once more. A few years back, I settled into this serene suburban neighborhood. Just 3 weeks into my new journey, I'm embracing a fresh start after my divorce. The house was ideal, a charming 2-story structure with a quaint garden out front, the sort of place where one would anticipate warm neighbors and lively neighborhood gatherings mostly, that is, except for him. It caught my attention for the first time just 2 days after I settled in. As I tended to my new rose bushes outdoors, a familiar chill crept up the back of my neck. Have you ever experienced the sensation of being observed? I raised my gaze, surveying the street. There he was, positioned in his upstairs window, partially obscured by the curtain, yet unmistakably observing me. I waved at him, making an effort to be friendly, but he didn't respond. He simply continued to gaze at me. Initially, I chose to overlook him. At first, I thought my interest in the new neighbor was merely curiosity, but as time passed, it became clear that it was something deeper. Each time I stepped outside, he was there, observing as he left for work, returned home, and sifted through the mail, always in that same window, always concealed behind the same curtain. I attempted to brush him off, continuing with my life as though everything was perfectly fine, yet the sense of unease was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. It all began with seemingly innocuous remarks, but then I came to the unsettling realization that it possessed knowledge I shouldn't have access to. "Oh, Jim mentioned you're in finance," Mrs. Patterson said one day as we chatted by the fence. I stood still, the weight of my secret pressing down on me. No one in the neighborhood had a clue about my actions or the knowledge I possessed. It was a moment to remember when I discovered a package waiting for me on my doorstep, a book I had longed to dive into. The note attached read simply, "I thought you might enjoy this." His neighbor never brought it up. I had merely searched for no one online, in the comfort of my own home. That night, I found myself wide awake, gazing at the ceiling as my thoughts raced through my mind. I attempted to rationalize how I was obtaining that information. Perhaps I brought up my work in passing and it slipped my mind. Perhaps the book was merely a coincidence, yet I sensed that something was amiss. The following morning, I made the decision to face it head-on. I stepped across the street. With a heavy heart but unwavering resolve, I approached the door and knocked firmly. I patiently waited. I tapped on emptiness once more. The car sat in the driveway, yet the house remained eerily quiet as I turned to make my exit. A flicker of movement drew my gaze. It was back in that window once more. This time, he made no effort to conceal himself. He stood boldly in plain view, locking his gaze onto mine. A shiver raced down my spine. His eyes were devoid of warmth, flat and unyielding. A subtle smile lingered at the edges of his lips, yet it failed to illuminate his gaze. It was the smile of someone who held a secret, my secret. I tried to speak, to voice my questions, but the words caught in my throat. There was a captivating intensity in his gaze that left me utterly frozen. I rushed back to my home, securing the door with shaky hands. That evening, I secured every door in my home. I drew the curtains shut and meticulously secured each lock, yet an unsettling sensation lingered, an eerie belief that he was still observing me, as if he possessed the ability to pierce through walls and fabric alike. I lay restless in bed, jolted awake by the house's creaks in the morning, my eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. As I made my way into the kitchen for a much-needed cup of coffee, my eyes caught sight of something unexpected, a note that had been slipped under my door. My blood ran cold as I read the words. "If you prefer to sleep on the right side, consider upgrading your curtains for an enhanced experience with your cup." It fell from my grasp, shattering on the ground. Scalding coffee splattered onto my bare feet, yet I hardly registered the sensation. How am I supposed to know that? My room was situated on the second floor, overlooking the backyard. There was no way he could catch a glimpse of me unless he had ventured inside. As I stood in my house, the realization struck me with the force of a gut punch. I dashed through the house, inspecting every room and closet, searching for any indication of a break-in. Everything seemed untouched, yet that did little to ease my anxiety. In fact, it only made things worse. It excelled at this, remarkably so. On that day, I dialed into work and feigned illness. The mere idea of stepping outside, of granting unrestricted access to the world beyond my door, was unbearable. I was completely unaware of my actions and the way I was executing them. However, I realized I had to take action. I dedicated the day to installing new locks, setting up security cameras, and even reinforcing the first-floor windows with bars. The clerk at the hardware store gave me a strange look as I filled my cart with every security device available, but I was unfazed. I needed to reclaim my sense of safety in my own home. As night fell, I found myself in my living room, enveloped by a sea of empty boxes and packaging. The new security system hummed gently in the background as I observed the monitors I had set up, displaying every angle of my home. Outside, everything remained still, no movement, no signs of life. At some point, I must have dozed off, for I jolted awake, disoriented. The room was cloaked in darkness, illuminated solely by the bright glare of the security monitors. I blinked, attempting to sharpen my focus when something in a figure in my backyard stood out on one of the screens, staring directly at the camera. My heart raced in my chest. I moved in closer, narrowing my eyes at the blurry picture. There he was, no longer hiding in the shadows. He stared directly at the camera, a chilling smile playing on his lips. Tom snatched my phone to call the police, but just as I was about to dial, one by one, the screens flickered off. They powered back on, but instead of revealing the view outside my house, each displayed the identical image. As I sat on my couch, phone clutched tightly in my hand, a wave of terror washed over me. The cameras had been compromised. He was observing me via my security system. I hurled the phone aside and dashed toward the door, disregarding any thoughts of security or the impending confrontation. Feeling isolated, I knew I had to escape, but as I opened the door, I unexpectedly came face to face with him. "Are you heading somewhere?" he inquired, his voice unexpectedly gentle. I attempted to slam the door shut, but it responded with greater speed and force. With a smooth motion, he propelled it forward, sending me retreating back into the living room. I tripped and collapsed onto the couch, my gaze darting around the room in search of a weapon, an escape route, anything at all. What's the reason behind this? I found myself stumbling over my words. What's the reason behind this action? He tilted his head, gazing at me with intrigue, as though I were an enthralling subject under scrutiny. Why didn't he respond? The vibe was laid back, with a hint of humor. You newcomers to these neighborhoods believe you're secure behind your locks and cameras, but have you ever paused to think about who was here before you? He gestured toward the dark screens, saying technology is amazing, but you might not realize how easily it can be twisted and turned against you. Your entire life is at stake. It's all out there, isn't it? Every purchase, every search, every message laid bare for those who know where to dig. I felt that wave of nausea every time I sensed I was under scrutiny. Those tiny details about me? It wasn't some mystical insight. I had meticulously pieced together my own life, one fragment at a time. "What are you looking for?" I inquired, loathing the feeble quality of my voice. His smile grew broader, and for the first time, I caught a glimpse of emotion flickering in her eyes. The desire was far from reassuring. "I'm not looking for anything, thank you. This goes beyond mere desire. It's about wielding emotional control, possessing deep insights into another person, and subtly steering their life without them even realizing it. Come a little nearer." Her gentle breath brushes against my skin, and your beloved neighbor has proven to be my most captivating topic yet. I shut my eyes. I longed for this to be nothing more than a fleeting dream. Yet, when I finally opened my eyes, he remained there, grinning. "Rest assured," he assured her, "I have no intention of causing you any harm." What would be the excitement in that? His eyes gleamed with a hint of something darkly intriguing. "I'm not going anywhere just yet, and you'll be left here pondering what I know, what I've witnessed, and what my next move might be. As you glance at each camera, every computer, and all your devices, a thought will linger. Am I watching you?" He faced the door, and with an unsettling calmness, I softly closed it behind him. Indeed, as I was leaving, I found myself standing there, trembling for what felt like an eternity. With newfound determination, I took the only logical step forward. I packed my belongings, hopped into my car, and hit the road. I had no specific place to go. All I knew was that I could never return to that house in that neighborhood again. As I drove past the city exit sign, I glanced back in the rear-view mirror. From that distance, I recognized him instantly, and a profound certainty washed over me, rendering the difference irrelevant. No matter where I went, he was always there, watching me, a constant presence in this digital age where fresh starts seem elusive. There's no hiding from someone who truly knows how to observe and listen. As I drove into the night, an unsettling feeling settled into his was just the start of a game I never consented to, yet one from which I could never break free. The headlights sliced through the darkness, revealing an endless stretch of asphalt that vanished into the night. After hours on the road, the monotonous roar of the engine and the solitude began to lull me into a drowsy haze. It was then that I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road with his thumb on the instant when I walked past him. Our eyes met. I shouldn't have stopped. God, I shouldn't have stopped. But I did. Maybe it was tiredness, maybe it was simple human decency. Whatever it was, I found myself slowing down and pulling off to the shoulder. The crunch of gravel under the tires echoed in the silence of the night as the car stopped. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the man jogging closer. His face was hidden in the shadows cast by the taillights. When he got closer, I made out some details. Tall, Delgado, probably in his 30s. He was wearing jeans, a dark jacket, and a backpack slung over his shoulder. Nothing out of the ordinary for a hitchhiker. I rolled down the window as he approached. "Where are you going?" I asked, trying to sound casual despite the slight uneasiness I felt. I knew it was a bad idea to pick up a stranger in the middle of nowhere. I knew it, but it was too late to back off. "Just a little further on," he replied in a surprisingly soft voice. "There's a truck stop about 50 kilometers away. I can get another ride." From there I hesitated for a moment, then I nodded. He went up, slid into the passenger seat, placing his backpack between his feet as he made his way back to the road. I glanced sideways at the dim light on the dashboard. I could see his features better. An angular face with a bit of a stubble, deep dark eyes. "Intense thanks for stopping," he said, breaking the silence. "Not many people do nowadays," I shrugged, keeping my eyes on the road. "No problem, I've been there before." Sometimes alone you need someone to give you a chance. A little smile formed at the corner of his lips. "Oh, I know more than you can imagine." We traveled in silence for a while, just the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of his clothes as he moved. I tried to relax. I was just a man, a random traveler, nothing to worry about. But there was something about him, something that made me tense. To break the silence, I tried make conversation. "What brought you here so late at night?" He turned his head and looked at me. A chill ran down my spine. His gaze was cold, calculating. Something in his eyes had changed. "I could ask you the same thing," he said in a low voice. "It's dangerous to be around alone. You never know who you might meet." My throat dried up. I squeezed the steering wheel a little more. "I'm just passing through," I replied, trying to sound casual. "I'm going to visit my family." He nodded slowly, not taking his eyes off me. "Family is important. You're lucky to have it. Some of us aren't that lucky." There was a sharp edge in his voice, a subtle bitterness. The discomfort in my chest grew. I wanted to speed up, get to the truck stop as quickly as possible, and get rid of him. But just as I picked up speed, I felt his hand on the steering wheel. Firm. "Sure, not so fast," he muttered. "Why don't you stop? I think it's time for us to have a conversation." More direct. Fear became a knot in my stomach. I shook my head, trying to stay calm. "I don't think it's a good idea. We're close to the stop. I'll leave you there." His grip on the steering wheel hardened. "I told you to stop." His voice was no longer smooth. It was an order. My mind was frantically working. I should try to fight her. The car jumped before I could decide. He did it for me. In a sudden movement, he turned the steering wheel sharply to the right. The car skidded violently, the tires screeched, the engine roared in protest as we were going off the road, and we sank into a cloud of dust. The car shook and stopped with a thud for a moment. Everything was silent. Then between him it turned to me with that smile on his face. "There it is," he whispered. "Much better now we can talk." My fingers reached for the door handle, ready to run away, but he was faster. His hand caught my wrist with impossible force. He whispered. "Don't be impolite." I swallowed hard. "You want to?" He tilted his head as if he was really considering the question. Then he slowly reached into his jacket. My heart pounded. He was waiting for a knife, a gun. But instead he pulled out a small metal box, old tarnish Ada and covered in strange symbols. "You know what this is?" he asked, twirling it between his fingers. I shook my head, unable to speak. "This," he whispered reverently, "it's a container." He opened the lid. For a brief moment, something seemed to move inside. Something dark, writhing, alive. But when I looked again at the box, it was empty. He smiled. "I've been searching for someone like you." A sense of dread tightening around my chest like a serpent's embrace. "You're crazy," you whisper, trembling. He lifted the box, mumbling in an unfamiliar tongue, and the air inside the car thickened, suffocating. My vision blurred, an unseen force tugging at me from within, as my consciousness began to slip away. The last image seared into my mind was his radiant, triumphant face, illuminated by a sickly green glow. In that moment, I understood with chilling clarity that I should never have stopped, never have picked up that hitchhiker. Because sometimes, the true monsters don't lurk in the shadows. They stand by the roadside, thumbs outstretched, waiting for someone kinder foolish enough to invite them into the darkness. The rustling of the leaves under my boots was the only sound that broke the eerie silence of the forest. I had been walking for hours enjoying the solitude, when I stumbled upon a small clearing. It was then that I saw it, an aged wooden post with a faded sign nailed to it. As I approached, my blood froze. My face, that returned my gaze from the missing person sign, was mine. I blinked, strongly convinced that I was seeing wrong, but no matter how many times I closed and opened my eyes, the image was still. Their immutable, same hair, same eyes that Sony's always in photos. The only difference was the name, Sar Thompson. Definitely not mine. My hands were shaking. Mine talked, the paper being that it disappeared like a mirage, but it was real, rough under my fingers. The date on the poster was from just months ago. My mind was he sped up, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. How was it possible? I clumsily pulled out my phone with the intention of taking a picture as proof, but just as I picked it up to capture the image, a movement caught my attention beyond the clearing. Partially hidden among the trees was a figure. My heart rose to my throat. It was too far away to make out clearly, but I could feel his eyes on me. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding small and scared in the immensity of the forest. There was no response. The figure remained motionless, watching. A shiver ran down my spine. The forest, that moments before had seemed peaceful, suddenly felt oppressive and dangerous. I had to get out of there now. I put my phone away, hurriedly forgetting the photo. When I turned around to leave, I heard the click of a branch behind me. Someone was following me. I quickened my pace without worrying about following the trail anymore. The only thing that mattered was to put as much distance as possible between me and that. The sounds of chase got louder, branches rustling, leaves waving. Anymore. They weren't even trying to be stealthy. My foot tripped over a root and I almost fell. That little delay, it was enough for my pursuer to cut the distance. Now I could hear her breathing close, too close. Panic took hold and I started to run. I went through the brush, the branches, scratching my face, my lungs burning, but the footsteps behind me never slowed, always at the same distance, never falling back. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to pull and warp, the minutes feeling like hours. My legs ached, my chest was shaking, but I didn't dare to stop. Finally, with a jolt of relief, I saw a clearing in the trees ahead. The parking lot where I had left my car appeared before my eyes like a salvation. I gritted my teeth and forced myself to run faster, straining every muscle. Exhausted as I left the tree line, I dared to look back at the forest behind me. I was silent. There was no sign of my pursuer. With trembling hands, I pulled the keys out of my pocket and struggled to get them into the lock. When I finally managed to get in, I slammed the door shut and locked the car. Stood there breathing heavily, my heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. It had just happened. Who was back there, and what that sign was? I closed my eyes, trying to calm my thoughts. None of this made sense. It took several minutes. Before I felt stable enough to drive while I was leaving the parking lot, I kept looking in the rearview mirror waiting to see that figure emerge from the forest, but the line of trees remained unaltered. The return trip was a blur. My mind repeated the image of the poster over and over again, trying to find some error, some detail that would show that it was not really me, but with each repetition the certainty grew more. It was my face. My face on a missing person poster dated TR months ago, when I knew with absolute knowing that I had been living my normal life. When I got home it was already dark. I rushed inside, securing the door and drawing all the curtains. Only then did I allow myself to really think about what had happened. I pulled out my phone with the intention of looking for information about a missing Sarah Thompson, but when the screen turned on, my heart stopped. There was a message from a number. You shouldn't have gone to the woods. Today my hands trembled when holding the phone. How could someone have my number? No one knew I had gone there. I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't posted anything on social networks that day. I had wanted to be alone. I had gone out without informing anyone of my plans. A new notification appeared on the screen. Another message. You liked the poster. I made it just for you. The phone fell off my hands. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of sick joke, but deep down I knew. The feeling of being watched in the woods, the chase, the poster, it was real. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed curled up on my couch, jumping with every sound, every shadow. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my face on that poster, and behind me always that figure lurking among the trees. The morning came gray and cloudy. I hadn't slept a minute, but the adrenaline kept me alert. I needed answers. With shaky hands, I grabbed my phone again. There were no more messages, thanks to God. I opened the browser and typed Sarah Thompson disappeared. Two made my blood freeze. There was the girl from the poster. But it wasn't me. She looked like me so much, too much. But as I studied the photo I noticed the subtle differences. Her nose was a little wider, her chin a little sharper. We could have been sisters, maybe even twins, but we weren't the same person. The article was dated TR months ago. 28-year-old Sarah disappeared while hiking in the same forest where I was yesterday. Despite intense searches, no trace of her was ever found. My mind was going full speed ahead. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to recreate that poster with my face. But why? A new notification appeared on the screen. My stomach sank. Another message from an unknown number. You already understood it. You are next. I felt a freezing cold run through my body. This wasn't just a sick game. It was a threat. Whoever was behind this had caught Sarah Thompson, and now they were after me. I called the police. My voice trembled as I tried to explain what had happened. But as I spoke I realized how absurd a sign sounded with my face on it. A shadow in the woods. Anonymous threatening messages took my statement, but I heard the disbelief in the officer's voice. They promised to investigate, but I knew they wouldn't take it seriously. The days passed. I didn't leave the house. I didn't answer the phone. My friends were calling worried, but I couldn't explain anything to them. I didn't even understand what was going on. The messages continued to come in, always from different numbers, always impossible to trace. Sometimes they were vague threats. Other times they were chillingly specific details about my life, which I had eaten for dinner, a phone call with my mother, the book I was reading in bed. They were watching me every moment, every day. But how? A week after my encuentro in the woods, I woke up to find something slipped under my door. A photograph of me sleeping in my bed, taken from inside my room, on the back written in red ink. There were only 2 words. It's time. I couldn't stay here any longer. In less than an hour, I already had a suitcase packed, and I was in my car with no destination. I just wanted to. As I left my house my phone vibrated once again. I didn't want to look, but I did. You can't run away from me, Sarah. I'll always find you. I threw the phone out the window and stepped on the gas. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just knew I didn't want to be like the other. Sarah Thompson didn't want to disappear, but as the familiar streets of my neighborhood disappeared in the rearview mirror, something moved in my peripheral vision, a flash of movement on the sidewalk. I turned my head, and there, standing in the distance, saw a motionless figure. I recognized its posture, its way of staying perfectly still, watching. I squeezed the steering wheel hard and accelerated. But even with every mile I left behind, I couldn't shaking off the feeling that this wasn't over yet. Someone out there was looking for me, waiting, and no matter how much I ran in the back of my mind, I knew it. In this game there was no escape, just the house, and I had just started. The first red flag must have been the way his eyes never quite met mine when he smiled. But I was caught up in the whirlwind of the finally being the center of someone's attention to notice. It wasn't until I woke up at 3 in the morning and saw him standing outside my window watching me with a chilling intensity that I understood that I had invited a monster into my life. My name is Sophie, and this is the story of how I fell in love with a man who became my worst nightmare. All it started out the most innocent way. I met Jack at a mutual friend's barbecue. He was charming, charismatic, and seemed genuinely interested in every word he said. After years of disappointing dating and aimless relationships, Jack was like a breath of fresh air. We went out several times, and in a matter of weeks I was completely in love. Our relationship was a whirlwind, elegant dinners, surprise weekend getaways, flowers delivered in. Jack was attentive, protective, almost too perfect, but at the time he didn't question it. I felt special, like I had finally found someone who really understood me. If I look back, I can see all the red flags that I ignored. His discomfort every time I mentioned to my friends or family. His insistence on seeing where I was at all times. Under the guise of wanting to surprise me the way I was, he slowly isolated me from my social circle, making me feel like he was the only person I could trust. But it was the night of the call when I knew something was really wrong. I woke up in the middle of the night with a sense of unease. I looked at my phone and saw a message from Jack. "You look beautiful when you sleep." My first reaction was to smile until I saw the time. The message had been sent 5 minutes ago. My stomach churned. I sat up slowly and looked out the window, and there he was, standing on the sidewalk in front of my building, staring at me. My body froze. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't romantic. This wasn't a gesture of love. This was lurking. The next morning I confronted him, asked him why he'd been outside my house in the middle of the night. His response was a light laugh and an "I couldn't sleep. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." He hugged me and kissed me on the forehead. "I only care about you." A part of me wanted to believe him. I wanted to think it was just his way of showing affection. But something inside me was screaming at me to run, and I should have done it because that night I saw him again, but this time I wasn't outside. I was inside, caught in my throat. My body froze as my mind tried to process what I saw. Since I was inside my apartment, I had no keys, no signs that I had forced a door or a window. But there I was standing in the dim light of my living room, my head slightly tilted as if I were waiting for me to say something. "Jack, what are you doing here?" My voice was barely a whisper. He smiled, a calm expression, too calm for the situation. "He wanted to see you." He took a step towards me. I took a step back, instinctively feeling the frantic beat of my heart in my ears. "As you came in," he sighed, as if the question seemed absurd to him. "That doesn't matter, Sophie. What matters is that I love you, and I want to make sure you're always safe." Panic turned into something solid in my chest. Something wasn't right. Something in his voice, in his expression, in the way he acted. Like nothing was strange. I forced myself to stay calm. "I think you should go now." For a moment Jack's smile hesitated. His eyes darkened. I saw something there, something cold, something that made me understand that I didn't know this man at all. Then, as if nothing had happened, he shrank. "If that's what you want." She walked to the door with an eerie tranquility and opened it before leaving. Turned to look at me one last time. "See you soon, Sophia." It wasn't a goodbye. It was a promise. As soon as the door closed, my legs hit and I fell to the floor. I had to get away from Jack, but I still didn't know how far. I was ready to run the next morning. I changed the locks. I also installed an extra swipe on the door and bought a small baseball bat that I placed by my bed. I wasn't going to let Jack back in. I spent the day trying to convince myself that I had overdone it. Maybe I had left the door open by accident. Maybe Jack just didn't understand boundaries. Maybe if I told him clearly that I didn't want to see him anymore, I would accept it. But then the calls started. At first they were text messages. "Good morning, beautiful. I hope you're having a good day. I miss you." I didn't answer. Then the calls started. First one, then two, then one every hour. I didn't answer them. And then the emails weren't threats. They weren't pleas. They were reports. "I saw you leave your work at 6:42 p.m. I saw you in the cafeteria this morning. You ordered the usual black without sugar. I know you were at Claire's house last night. I don't understand why you're walking away from me." Horror settled in my chest. Jack was following me. It's his number, his mail, everything. But the messages kept coming in from different accounts, different numbers, and then one night I woke up from a restless sleep and I felt something was wrong. The air in my room was dense, charged with electricity, and then I saw it. A Shadow at the foot of my bed. Jack was looking at me smiling, and in his hand he was holding a key. My world stopped. Sophie whispered, "I told you I would always protect you." The scream that had been trapped in my throat finally came out. I screamed with all my might as I threw myself out of bed, tripping over the bedside table. Jack didn't move. He just looked at me with that unsettling smile, holding the key in his hand. He just looked at me with that unsettling smile, holding the key in his hand. My fingers blindly searched for Biz that I had next to the bed. When I found him, I held him tightly and lifted him between us. "Get out of my house now." Jack tilted his head as if he was confused by my reaction. "Sophie, why are you afraid?" My skin stood on end. How could I ask? That was in my room in the middle of the night with a key that shouldn't have the key. "How did you get in?" I asked in a trembling voice. Jack smiled calmly. Too calm. "No matter how, what matters is that I'm here to take care of you, to make sure you're safe." Every word of his made me feel more trapped. My mind was racing. How had I gotten a key? I had changed the locks, and then I understood. The locksmith, when I changed the locks, he should have gotten a copy. The revelation made me feel sick. Jack took a step towards me. "I don't want to hurt you, Sophie, but I can't leave you alone. Not when I know you might need me. Not when I know you could leave." My stomach churned. I wasn't going to reason with him. I wasn't going to get out of this talking to him. I took a breath, and before he could react, I lifted the bat, hit him with all my might on the knee. The sound was horrible. A scream of pain escaped his lips as he fell to the floor. I didn't wait. I ran. I left the room and threw myself towards the front door, unlocking the locks with trembling hands. Just as I opened it, I felt his hand grabbing my arm. "Sophie!" I turned with a scream and hit him in the face with the bat. Jack fell backwards. I seized the moment and ran away into the hallway, screaming for help. The police arrived in minutes. Jack was still in my apartment when the officers came in, his face covered in blood, his knee bent unnaturally as they handcuffed him. He kept looking at me, smiling. "We'll see each other again," Sophia said in a whisper. I shuddered, but then I felt a firm hand on my shoulder. An officer looked at me seriously. "No, he won't." And for the first time for a long time, I felt safe. 2 months later, as I was behind bars, the restraining order was in effect. I moved into a new apartment on another side of town, but the paranoia was still there. Sometimes walking down the street, I would stop when I saw a car similar to his. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night with the echo of his voice in my head. But something inside I had changed. I was no longer the same Soapy who fell in love with Jack. Now I knew how to recognize the signs, and I would never again allow anyone to make me feel small, helpless. I signed up for self-defense. I joined a support group for survivors of bullying. I had tried to take away my peace, but I hadn't succeeded, and I never would, because I now knew the most important truth of all. Love shouldn't be scary. Love shouldn't make you feel trapped, and if it does, it's not love. The silence was deafening. That was what struck me the most, as I sat on the porch of the cabin, a steaming cup of coffee in my hands to combat the cold morning air. There was no noise of traffic, no hum of electricity, no distant voices, just an absolute silence that seemed to press from all sides. I had been pacific, but instead I was nervous, as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting. I had rented this cabin for a week, desperate to get away from the chaos of the city and the stress of my job, a break, unplugging, recharging. Now, 3 days later, I was starting to wonder if I had made a mistake. The cabin itself was cozy, rustic, but comfortable, with a well-equipped kitchen and a fireplace that had kept the chill of the nights at bay, but its isolation, which I had found so attractive when I made the house, now felt oppressive. The nearest town was an hour's drive away, and I hadn't seen another human being since the property manager left me the keys. I sipped a sip of coffee. My gaze swept along the line of trees surrounding the small meadow where the cabin stood. Tall pine trees stretched as far as the eye could see, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. It was beautiful in a wild and primitive sense, but there was something else, a sensation that I couldn't shake, as if I were being watched. I shook my head, trying to get rid of those paranoid thoughts. It was ridiculous, just my imagination running wild. Too many horror movies, probably. Still, when I finished my coffee and went back into the cabin, I couldn't avoid taking one last glance over my shoulder. The forest stood still, silent, revealing nothing. The day passed without incident. I took a walk along a nearby trail, read a book by the fireplace, prepared a simple dinner. But when night fell, the anxiety settled again in my chest. The darkness outside seemed thicker than usual, wrapping the cabin like a blanket. Every creak of the old structure made my heart leap. I tried to distract myself with the TV, but the satellite signal was intermittent. I finally decided to go to bed early. hoping that a good night's sleep would help me calm down. I don't know what woke me up. One moment I was in a deep sleep and dreamless. The next I was wide awake, every nerve in my body on alert. The room was plunged into absolute darkness, the kind of darkness that only exists far from civilization. I held my breath, listening. There was a soft, almost imperceptible sound. It could have been the wind or an animal moving through the bushes, but something about it made my hair stand on. And it sounded deliberate, as if someone was walking around the cabin, moving slowly, trying not to make a sound. I stood completely still, my heart hammering into my ribs. The footsteps stopped right outside my window. Now I could listen for something else, low, soft, almost close breath, and then the sound of a hand pressing against the glass, the slow sliding of nails scratching the surface. My throat closed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but fear paralyzed me. I stood there, stiff, eyes wide open, in the darkness, waiting. Then, as if I'd never been there, the sound disappeared, the silence came back, but I didn't fool myself. I knew I was still out there waiting, watching. I don't know how long I stayed awake. Finally fatigue overcame fear and I fell asleep. I woke up with sunlight filtering through the curtains. For a moment I thought it had all been a dream, but the memory of breathing in my window, the sound of nails on the glass, I knew I hadn't imagined it. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. Nothing. The clearing outside seemed normal, quiet, too quiet. I had imagined it all. The doubt began to settle in my mind until I decided to check around the cabin, put on my shoes and went out onto the porch. The morning air was cool and the dew made the ground slip a little under my boots. I walked slowly around the cabin, looking for any sign of what I had heard the night before. At first I saw nothing out of the ordinary, only damp grass and pine needles scattered on the floor. But then I froze right under my window. Marks on the ground, not normal footprints. They weren't boots or bare feet. They were too long, too deformed. Something had been there watching me sleep. A chill ran down my spine with trembling steps. I went back inside the cabin and closed the door with key. With shaking hands I took my phone and dialed the property manager's number. Replied after 3 tones, "Hello, there's someone out here." I let out my trembling voice. "Last night I heard footsteps, and this morning I found footprints." There was a pause. When he spoke again, his voice was strangely calm. "You're sure it wasn't an animal? There are bears out there." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "Number, they weren't bear tracks, were human, or almost human." Another pause. "I'm going there," he finally said. "Don't do anything, don't go out." I hung up and I plopped down in a chair, feeling sick. The next hour was the longest of my life. Every shadow outside the window made me jump. Every creak of the wood made my heart race. Finally I heard a car approaching. I ran to the door but stopped before I opened. "It's you." I knocked. "Yes." "Open the door." I went out to the porch, my body still trembling. The attendant looked at me with a frown. "Show me the footprints." I guided him to the window, but when we got there was nothing. The floor was intact, no footprints, no signs that anything had been there. My lips parted, but no sound came out. "I think you've been alone here too long," said the attendant finally. "Sometimes the mind plays tricks." I turned to look at the forest. Silence answered me, but I knew the truth. I knew something had been here, and worse, I knew it was still there, waiting, watching, always watching. The first warning sign should have been the way I smiled, too wide, too perfect, as if I had practiced it in the mirror a million times. But at that moment I was too excited to meet my new neighbor to notice. If only I'd paid attention to that twinge of discomfort in my stomach, maybe things would have been different. I'd bought the house just a week ago, a lovely little house with a white fence, the classic American dream. The first few days were a whirlwind of unpacking and settling in. And then, on my 4th day there, I met Jack. He arrived with a tray of cookies, the epitome of the friendly neighbor welcome to the neighborhood. His voice was his impeccable smile. "I'm Jack, alive next door." I invited him to stop by, thankfully for the company. After days of solitude we chatted while drinking coffee, and overall he seemed like a nice guy. He asked all the right questions of where you're from, what you do for a living, how you've been settling in, but there was something about the way I listened to his head tilted slightly, eyes never leaving me, face made me feel exposed. When he left, he paused at the door. "You know, this neighborhood is very safe, but it never hurts to be cautious." He looked at me fixedly. "If you want, I can keep an eye on your house when you're not there." I smiled and thanked him, thinking it was a kind offer. I didn't realize at the time that it wasn't an offer, it was a warning. At first I didn't give it importance. It was a friendly neighbor, just that. But then I started to notice things. Jack was always there, mowing the lawn when I went out to work, taking out the trash When I came back at first I thought which was coincidence, but soon I felt his eyes on me all the time. One afternoon while I was watering the flowers his voice made me jump. "They are looking pretty on you." I turned and found him on the fence looking at me with that unwavering smile. I had no idea how long I had been there. "Oh, thank you." I tried to sound relaxed. "I'm not very good at gardening." Jack tilted his head. "Could give you some advice. I have a keen eye for these things." His eyes wandered to my house. "By the way, I noticed you left your bedroom window open last night." My stomach sank. "How do you know what my room is?" His smile didn't change. "Oh, I only noticed as I passed by. You know, one always notices those details." A chill went up my spine. That night I double-checked all the locks and lowered the blinds, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. The little coincidences kept piling up. Night I found the porch light on when I was sure I had turned it off. My mailbox always had the mail slightly messed up as if someone had rummaged through it. Once I even saw a shadow move through my kitchen window at midnight. Every time something like that happened, Jack would appear the next day with his usual smile. "I heard a noise last night. I went out to check, but I didn't see anything. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Oh, I saw a strange car passing down the street yesterday. You have to be vigilant. You never know." Always the same tone. Always the same message. You can't be too sure, like only he could protect me. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon. I was sitting in the backyard trying to enjoy the sun when his voice interrupted my thoughts. "Beautiful day." I turned and saw him on the fence, but this time something in his expression had changed. There was something in his eyes that gave me goosebumps. "I was thinking," he said in a casual voice, "I could help you install security cameras. They are very useful." I felt a chill immediately. "No thanks, I'm fine." His smile tightened. "Just a second, come on, it would be the best. As I told you, I've been watching over you, but I can't be everywhere. My patience has run out. I don't need you to watch anything, Jack. I can take care of myself." There was a flash in his eyes. "Somewhat dangerous." Then gently he said, "Oh, I don't think so." His eyes studied me. "I don't think you have any idea how dangerous the world can be." He leaned a little more over the fence. "But don't worry." His smile came back to you. "I'll keep it safe whether you want it or not." That night I didn't sleep. I stayed awake hiding behind curtains and saw him at 3 a.m. standing at the window of his house looking straight at mine without moving for hours. The next morning I called the police. Told them everything. The looks, the innuendos, the comments about my windows and lights. The officer listened patiently and then said, "He's done something illegal." "No, but he's broken into your property. He's made direct threats to you." "Not exactly. But I'm sorry, miss, being too friendly. It's not a crime." I hung up, feeling helpless. That night, I heard noises on the porch, some soft footsteps, a creak near my bedroom window. When I looked, there was nothing, but I knew Jack was there waiting, watching me. A month later I woke up in the middle of the night. The house was in complete silence except for one sound, the soft click of a key turning in my lock. My front door slowly opened and there was Jack standing in the dark, smiling calmly. His voice was soft, reassuring. "I just came to make sure you're safe," and in his hand a jar with a syringe. My body froze. I didn't want to hurt myself. He really believed he was protecting me. But he did it. Still scarier. Instinct took control. I grabbed the lamp from the bedside table and threw it with all my might. Hit his head with a deft crack. Jack fell to the ground. I ran barefoot, and in my pajamas I went out into the street screaming. The cops arrived minutes later. Jack was arrested. His house was full of hidden cameras, monitors with live feeds of my house. I moved, but even now sometimes I feel her gaze, as if somewhere Jack is still watching over me, waiting for the day I need her protection again. The first time I saw her standing by my bed, I thought I was dreaming. Her silhouette was barely visible in the dark, a shadow between shadows, but as my eyes got used to the gloom, I made out the outline of her face. Her eyes were wide open. Couple fixed on me, blinked, and she disappeared. It was then when the real nightmare began. I had been excited to start college. The promise of freedom from new experiences filled me with excitement when I knew I would be sharing a room in the dorm room. I was even happier to have a roommate. Meant not being alone in this new chapter of my life. The day of the move I met Sarah. Seemed nice, although a little. She had long, dark hair that she always pulled back into a messy bun. She always wore oversized sweaters. Even though it was still hot, we exchanged a few words as they unpacked, but she didn't talk much beyond the basics. The first few weeks went smoothly. We got used to sharing the space, politely distant but without conflict. Sarah spent most of her time at her desk with her headphones on. I tried to start a conversation sometimes, but her answers were always brief. Her eyes never seemed to meet mine. It wasn't until about a month into the semester that I noticed something strange. I woke up in the middle of the night with an unsettling feeling, that feeling that you're being watched. When I opened my eyes, I saw Sarah standing at the foot of my bed watching me. I sat up suddenly with a start. She turned quickly and went back to my own bed, without saying a word. The next morning I tried to mention it naturally while we were having breakfast. "Hey, everything is fine. Last night I asked. I thought I saw you standing next to my bed." Sarah looked at me with a neutral expression. "What didn't? I slept all night. It must have been a dream." I laughed nervously and let the matter go. Maybe I had imagined it after all. But then it happened again and again. Each time I woke up in the middle at night and there she was, Sarah, watching me. Every time I tried to mention it, she denied it. "I don't know what you're talking about, you're dreaming about." But she wasn't. She knew what she saw. She knew what she felt. I began to dread bedtime. I stayed awake until the wee hours of the morning, pretending to be asleep, with my eyes half closed. I saw how she got up from her bed, how she slowly approached mine, how she stood there motionless watching me during the day. She acted like nothing was happening. But I started noticing other little things, the way she sometimes looked at me when I thought I didn't see her, how I knew details of my routine that I had never mentioned to her. I tried to rationalize. Maybe she was sleepwalking. Maybe she had some sleep disorder. Maybe I was exaggerating. But then the night came that changed everything. I woke up abruptly. But not this time. She was standing at the foot of my bed. She was leaning over me, her face just inches from mine, her big dark eyes staring at me without blinking. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. We stayed like this for what seemed like an eternity. Then she slowly raised a hand. Her cold fingers brushed my cheek, and she whispered, "You're so beautiful. When you sleep so peacefully, so vulnerable." A muffled scream escaped my throat. Sarah was startled and he backed away quickly, returning to his bed without saying a word. I spent the rest of the night awake. At dawn, I decided that was enough. When Sarah woke up, I faced her. "We have to talk." Her expression did not change, but her eyes studied me carefully. "About what?" "About you. About what you do at night." A long silence. Then suddenly she began to cry softly, at first, then with more intensity. "I'm sorry. I'm daring. I didn't want to scare you. I can't help it." She covered her face with her hands. "I didn't know what to say since I was a child," she continued with a broken voice. "I've always had trouble sleeping. But it's not just insomnia." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I need to see others sleep." I was speechless. Sarah continued. "She started with my younger sister, then with a friend at the sleepovers. Now I can't stop it." She bit her lip. "Looking at the floor when I watch you sleep, it's the only time I feel at peace. The only moment my mind stops running." My skin stood on end. I didn't know whether to feel sorry for you or fear, maybe both. This wasn't normal and I didn't feel safe. That same morning I spoke to the counselor at the residence. She took the matter seriously. Sarah was transferred to a single room and started intensive therapy. They offered me a new roommate. But after everything that happened, I decided I'd rather be alone for weeks. I kept waking up in the middle of the night, convinced that I saw her standing by my bed. I felt her gaze on me. I heard her breathing. But every time I turned on the light, the room was empty. I started to sleep better. Things went back to normal until I saw her again. It was close at the end of the semester. She was walking around campus when I saw her sitting on a bench reading a book. She looked different, healthier. The dark circles under her eyes were gone. Her baggy sweaters were replaced by clothes that fit her better. She also saw me for a moment. We just stared at each other. Then she stood up and walked over to me. "Hello," she said quietly. "I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry." She wrung her hands. "I'm getting help. I'm better." I didn't know what to answer. "That's what I'm glad you murmur." Sarah broke it. "I know what I did was wrong, but I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you." Her eyes met mine for the first time. I saw something more than sadness in them. I saw something deeper. I shuddered. "Well, I'm glad you're better. Take care of yourself." "Sarah, take a step back." She smiled slightly. "You too." As I walked away, I felt her gaze following me. I didn't want to turn around that night. I woke up suddenly. There was no end there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere Sarah was awake, thinking about me. Because some things, once seen, can never be undressed. The phone vibrated in my pocket, feeling more like an electric shock running through my body. I didn't want to look at it. I knew what I would find. Another message from an unknown number. Another piece of my privacy shattered. But like a moth attracted to a flame, I couldn't resist. With trembling fingers, I took out my phone and read the text. "The blue looks good on you. Today it matches your eyes." My heart stopped. I was wearing a blue shirt, one I had bought yesterday. Hadn't told anyone. Hadn't posted any photos online. How could they know everything? A simple message from an unknown number had started 3 weeks ago. "Have a nice day at work." I dismissed it as a mistake. Maybe someone had the wrong number. But they kept coming, always from different numbers, always impossible to trace. At first they were harmless comments about the weather or current events, but then they became personal. They knew where I worked, what I had had lunch, who I had spoken to that day. It was like having a shadow, one that saw everything I did but remained invisible. I went to the police, of course, but what could they do? There were no threats or demands, just someone who seemed to know everything about my life. They took a report and told me to keep track of the messages. But I could see the skepticism in his eyes in the age of overexposure on social networks, how to prove that they were not just coincidences, but I knew they were not. I became paranoid. I checked my privacy settings obsessively. I even covered my laptop camera and the lens of my cell phone with adhesive tape. I stopped posting on social networks altogether, and still the messages kept coming. That new haircut, it looks good on you. Your mom will love the birthday gift you bought her. You should eat more than just coffee for breakfast. Every message, it was a knife. Sinking deeper into my sense of security, I stopped sleeping well. I'm startled with every notification, every vibration on my phone. My friends noticed the change in me, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I shuddered when someone was approaching me unexpectedly. But how could I explain to them that someone was watching me, that they knew every aspect of my life, and that I had no idea who I was or how I did it? I considered changing my number. But the rational part of my mind knew it wouldn't do any good. If they could get my private information so easily, a new number would be child's play. As I looked at the last message on my blue shirt, another one came. You look pale, you feel good. I slammed my head up, scanning the crowded street around me. People rushing by, absorbed in their own worlds, on their own phones. Any of them could be the one sending the messages. Or maybe they were watching from one of the countless windows overlooking the street, or from the traffic cameras on every corner. I felt exposed, vulnerable like an insect under a microscope. Every movement scrutinized by an invisible observer. My palms were sweating, my breathing was shallow. I needed to get in somewhere. Away from prying eyes, I walked into the nearest coffee shop, a small, dimly lit place I'd never been before. I settled in a corner with my back against the wall so I could see the whole room. My phone vibrated again. The band's beat is their specialty. Here, you should try it. My blood froze. How could they know where I was? I hadn't planned to come here. I hadn't told anyone. It was an impulsive decision made in a moment of panic. With trembling hands, I asked for the band's late. When it arrived, I was staring at it, unable to take a sip. It felt like a surrender, like playing their game. But what other option did I have? While the late cooled without touching, I tried to think rationally. Who could be doing this to me? An ex hadn't dated anyone in years, a coworker. But how would they know what I was doing outside of work? A neighbor. But then, how they followed me when I left the house. My mind ran through every possibility, each one more unlikely than the last. I was being harassed. Someone with advanced technology had unintentionally angered someone with the resources to mount this kind of surveillance, or I was just losing my mind. The worst thing was not knowing who was watching me or why they were getting pleasure from my fear. They were preparing for something worse, or it was just an elaborate joke that I didn't understand. I sat there for hours, caught in a spiral of thoughts. When the afternoon started to fade, my phone vibrated again. It's getting late. You should go home. Don't forget to buy milk on the way. There's little left. A hysterical laugh, bubbling in my throat. Of course they knew I needed milk. Since they told me to go home as a concerned friend instead of the torturer they really were. When I left the cafeteria and the crisp afternoon air hit my face, I made up my mind. I wouldn't go home, not to my apartment, where every nook and cranny might be hiding a camera or a microphone. I headed in the opposite direction of my usual route for hours on unfamiliar streets, through neighborhoods I'd never been to, took random turns, retraced my steps, all to try to shake the feeling that I was being followed. But with each step my phone vibrated. That's an interesting part of the city. I never imagined you with interest in architecture. The pizzeria on the corner is fantastic. You should try a slice. Your friend Sarah lives 2 streets from here. Why don't you stop by to visit her? It was useless. It didn't matter. Wherever I went they knew. As midnight approached, exhaustion overcame me. My feet hurt, my head throbbed, and the weight of constant surveillance crushed me like something physical. Finally defeated, I returned home. When I approached my building, one last message arrived. Welcome back. Sleep well. We will talk about again tomorrow. I collapsed. An idea hit me hard. Despite the fear, despite the invasion of my privacy, a small part of me had begun to wait for the messages, to wonder what they would say next, and that idea terrified me more than anything else. because in that instant I understood the true nightmare of my situation. They had not only invaded my life, they had become an essential part of it. The acrid smell of burnt rubber filled my nostrils as I pulled up to the side of the desolate highway, watching helplessly as black smoke rose from the hood of my car. This was not what I had planned for my trip. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no signal on my cell phone and with the sun sinking rapidly into the horizon. It was then that I saw the lights of a car approaching the away. For a moment I felt a wave of relief. I had no idea that those lights would mark the beginning of the scariest night of my life. I am Sarah, a 26-year-old graphic designer from Portland. I decided to take a solo trip down the Pacific Coast Highway, a little adventure to clear my mind after a complicated breakup. Everything had gone well until my old Honda Civic decided to give up on this lonely road as the car approached. Waved my arms, grateful for any help. It was an old pickup truck with rust eating away at the edges. The driver, a middle-aged man with a neat beard and a worn baseball cap, rolled down the window. "Car trouble?" he asked in a rough but not entirely hostile voice. "Yes," I responded, trying to sound calm instead of desperate. He started to smoke from suddenly. "He knows something about cars." The man let out a brief laugh as he got out of the truck. "Fixed cars since before you were born. Let's see what we have here." A wave of relief ran through me. Maybe my luck was improving, after all. The man who introduced himself as Tom lifted the hood and watched the engine with a thoughtful gesture. After a few minutes of inspection he straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "The good news, it's just a burst radiator hose. The bad news is you're not going anywhere tonight." My stomach sank. "There's no workshop nearby." Tom shook his head. "The nearest town is about 30 kilometers away." I took a deep breath. I didn't want to do this, but I had no choice. "I guess there's a motel nearby, right?" Tom smiled. "Nothing around here. But look, I've got one cabin a few miles from here. My wife and I usually host stranded travelers. You can stay tonight, and in the morning I'll take you to town to fix your car." My instinct screamed at me not to do it, but the last light of the sun disappeared and the cold wind was starting to blow. I didn't have many options. "That would be very kind," I said, trying to sound grateful instead of terrified. Tomas felt with satisfaction. "Come on, take what you need and hop in." As it formed in my stomach, something wasn't right. The road became a dirt path that went into the forest. The trees closed around us, their branches scratching the body of the truck like bony fingers. I squeezed my bag tightly, my shallow breathing after what seemed like an eternity. Emergency HIMOs in a clearing. The cabin was in front of us, a small, dark structure against the night sky. There was no light on the porch, there was no smoke coming out of the chimney. It seemed abandoned. Tom turned off the engine and got out. "Welcome home," he said with a smile. The air was too quiet, not even crickets nor frogs, as if the forest were holding its breath. Tom opened the door with a key, and the wood creaked as it moved. The interior smelled of dust and damp wood. "There is no electricity," he explained, as he lit an oil lamp. "My wife must be asleep early." The flickering glow illuminated the sparse furniture, a worn sofa, an old table, rickety chairs, all covered by a thin layer of dust. It looked like an inhabited home. Fear curled into my stomach. "The guest room at the end of the hallway," Tom said. "The bathroom is right next door. Get comfortable." I nodded stiffly, clutching my bag like a lifesaver as Tom disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. I entered the room and closed the door immediately, placed a chair under the knob. Wouldn't stop someone determined to enter, but at least it would make me feel a little safer. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding. Something was wrong. Where was his wife? Why did the cabin seem abandoned? Why every cell in my body was screaming at me to run away? I pulled out my phone, desperately waiting for a signal. Nothing was. Completely incommunicado. I knew I wouldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, my ears listening for any sound. The house creaked, the seconds dragged on like hours. Then I heard him. Deliberate, slow footsteps stopping just outside my door. I held my breath, my body tense. The doorknob moved first once, then again, then silence. I don't know how long I waited before I heard the footsteps move away, and then voices, murmurs, barely audible. "Listen, Tom, we can't do this anymore," whispered a female voice. "It's too late to back down," he replied, Tom harshly. "No one is going to miss one more girl." My heart almost stopped. It wasn't hospitality. It was a trap. I had to get out of there quickly. I picked up my things and looked at the small window, but big enough I could slide in with shaky hands. I opened it, praying I wouldn't grind. The cold night air hit me in the face behind me. The voices stopped. "You heard that, I didn't. I stayed to find out." I slipped out of the window, falling awkwardly to the ground. My ankle screamed in pain, but I didn't stop. I ran, I went into the woods, the branches scratching my arms, the darkness swallowing me whole behind me, a furious scream. "Come back here!" "Don't look back." I kept running, my heart about to burst. I ran until the cabin was far away, until my legs couldn't take it anymore. When you finally emerged that and I stumbled on the road, saw the lights of a gas station in the distance, ran towards it. The manager looked at me with alarm when I entered, dirty, trembling, with panic painted on my face. Balbu, my story, called the police. Tom and his wife were arrested. I wasn't their first victim, but I was the first to escape. I survived. But I'll never forget the cabin in the woods, nor the night I knew which really means to feel scared. The hairbrush wasn't where I had left it, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, dripping water after the shower, looking at the empty space on the counter. I always left it there, right next to the toothbrush holder, always, but now it wasn't. A chill ran down my spine and had nothing to do with my wet skin. It wasn't the first time this was the case for weeks. I had noticed little things out of place in my apartment. At first I dismissed it as simple forgetfulness, stress, or absent-mindedness. A book moved from its place, a cup of coffee that was on another shelf, nothing important, nothing to worry about. But as I wrapped myself in a towel and began to reach for my brush, a growing sense of unease settled in my stomach. I finally found it tucked into a drawer I never used while running it through my wet hair. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I'd been living in this apartment for 3 years since I got my job at the downtown marketing firm. It was small but cozy, a third floor in an old building with lots of character. I'd always felt safe here, comfortable, but lately that sense of security had been slowly crumbling, replacing with a constant anxiety that I couldn't explain. At first were small things. I would come home from work and find a window ajar when I was sure I had closed it, or wake up in the middle of the night convinced that I had heard footsteps in the living room, only to find everything in its place. When I went to check, I would repeat to myself that I was being paranoid, that old buildings make noises, that memory tricks. But in the background, a part of me knew something wasn't right. The brush incident was the breaking point that morning. While I was getting dressed for work, my mind was going into overdrive. Someone was coming into my apartment while I was gone. But nothing was really stolen, just moving. How they were getting in. I always locked the door and lived on a third floor. I considered talking to my landlord, but what was going to tell him? I think someone enters my apartment and slightly changes the place of my things. It sounded ridiculous, even in my head. Instead, I decided to set a trap. That afternoon after work, I took pictures of each room in my apartment, capturing the exact position of each object. Then I spread a layer of talcum powder on the window frames and in front of the door. If someone entered, it would leave footprints. That night I hardly slept. Every creak of the building, every distant siren made me sit up suddenly in bed with a wild heart. But when dawn broke and I checked, the talc was intact. I took a deep breath, feeling silly for having worried so much, and then I saw it, plant on the coffee table, the same one I had photographed the night before. It was turned a few degrees to the left. A minuscule change, barely noticeable. But I was looking, and I was looking at it. I saw my hands trembling as I compared the photo with reality. There was no doubt someone had been here. But since the door was closed, the windows intact, was impossible. I called work to say I was sick. I spent the whole day checking the apartment, looking for any sign of entry, some indication of how someone was bypassing my locks, but there was nothing. No forced bolt, no open window, nothing except that plant, and the worst of all, I knew it wouldn't be the last time. Fear soon turned to anger. Someone was playing a sick joke. But who and why? Wasn't I an important person? I had no enemies. I didn't owe anyone money. Why would someone spend so much effort moving my things without a trace? That night I didn't set traps, I didn't sleep. I sat in the darkness of my living room with all the lights off, waiting for the hours. Midnight came and went. My body was exhausted, but my senses were alert, and then, at 3 in the morning, I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, a scratch in the kitchen. My heart stopped. I got up slowly, slipping into the darkness towards the kitchen. The room was in darkness, lit only by the dim light of the street lamps. At first I didn't see nothing out of place, and then I saw her move, the gabita by the sink sliding slowly. There was no one there, but it was opening an inch. Then, too, my mind froze, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Before I could scream, the drawer slammed shut with a rumble that shook the whole apartment. I backed away, wobbling all the lights, and checked every corner of the apartment, but I was alone, completely alone. No, I went back to sleep that night at dawn. called my landlord and demanded that he change the locks. He came that afternoon with an expression of concern and skepticism while I explained what was happening. But when he checked the door his expression changed. "This is strange," he muttered, examining the lock closely. "What is strange about it?" I asked with my heart in my throat. He pointed to some weak scratches around the bolt. "These marks, they're not normal. It's like someone had been picking the lock regularly." My blood froze. I wasn't crazy. Someone had been entering my apartment, but how the landlord changed the lock to a more secure one. He asked me if I wanted to call the police. I said no. What would I tell them? Someone is entering my apartment and moving my things a few centimeters. It sounded ridiculous. That night I slept soundly. For the first time in weeks I was sure that the new lock would keep me safe. But the next morning my security crumbled on my nightstand. There was a key that wasn't there. The night before, a key that with a shiver of terror I knew would fit perfectly in my new lock. I didn't bother to check the rest of the apartment. I just grabbed my purse, my phone, and ran away. Ran to my car and drove with no clear destination. I just wanted to walk away. As the city disappeared in my rearview mirror, my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "You forgot your brush. Don't worry. I'll put it away until you get back." I tossed it into the passenger seat, my hands shaking. But deep down I knew, no matter how far I ran, no matter how far I was, they could reach me anywhere. The photograph slipped from my trembling fingers, floating around to the ground like a fallen leaf. I stared at my mind, refusing to process what I had just seen was impossible. It couldn't be real, and yet there was a picture of me standing in my own living room fast asleep. I had found the photo tucked into my mailbox that morning, hidden among bills and advertising. At first I thought it was just a weird angle, a trick of light, but the more I looked at it, the more confident I was in my pajamas. Favorite, standing in the center of my living room with my eyes closed. The timestamp in the corner read 3:17 in the morning. 2 nights ago. I live alone. I always lock the doors and windows, and definitive I don't sleepwalk. With trembling hands I picked up the photo again and examined every detail. The more I looked, the more disturbing the angle became. It suggested that the photo had been taken from close up from my front door. Someone had been in my house a few feet away from me while I slept, completely oblivious. My breathing became erratic as I pulled out the phone, ready to call the police, and then I saw it in the background of the photo, barely visible. In the dim light there was a figure, a dark silhouette standing in the hallway, leading to my room, looking at me or looking at the photographer. My blood froze. This wasn't just a break-in. It was something much, much worse. I spent the next hour on the phone with the police, my trembling as I explained the situation. They took my report, but they didn't seem particularly concerned. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen. They suggested changing the locks and promised to send a patrol car for a walk at night, but I knew that wouldn't be enough. Someone had been to my house. I had photographed myself at my most vulnerable, and I wanted you to know that night I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, a kitchen knife wielded with my sweaty palm. Every crack of the house, every gust of wind outside made my heart pound. I expected to see a shadow move up the wall. I expected to hear footsteps in the hallway, but nothing happened. The night passed slowly, tortuous, and finally dawn came. Exhausted and nervous from too much coffee, I headed to work. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave me on the train. In the office, walking down the street, everywhere, I felt eyes on me. When I came home that afternoon I found another envelope in my mailbox. My hands were shaking, so much so that I could barely open it. Inside there was another photo. This time it was in the kitchen, was resting my head on my arms as if I had fallen asleep while eating breakfast. The timestamp indicated that it had been taken that morning. But I hadn't fallen asleep at the table. I remembered my morning clearly. I had been too restless, too scared to even sit down for breakfast. I had walked up and down the kitchen swallowing coffee before running away. But the proof was there in my hands. Somehow, someone had come back in, drugged me, put me in that position, photographed everything. Without a trace, I called the police again. This time they sent an officer to take my statement in person. I was young, probably fresh out of the academy, and tried to hide her skepticism as I babbled over the photos and the feeling of being watched. "Miss," she said in a voice calmed down, "you're sure he doesn't suffer from sleepwalking? He's not taking any medication that causes memory loss?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him until he understood the terror he was experiencing. But I just shook my head, fighting back tears. He left me with the contact card of a security company and the promise to investigate further. But I saw in his eyes that he didn't believe me. What he was thinking, I was just another boring person with a hyperactive imagination. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I put my laptop on the kitchen table, opened a live streaming app and started recording. If something happened, if someone came into my house, I would have proof. The hours passed, the bay and settled occasionally. Some car passed outside, but nothing out of the ordinary until 3:17 in the morning, a moment I was staring at the screen, struggling to keep my eyes open. The next one, I was waking up slumped on the table, confused. I looked at the time, 5:45 in the morning. With a growing dread, I backed up the GRA. There I was, sitting at the table with my eyes fixed on the screen. And then at exactly 3:17 in the morning the transmission went dark. When it came back 2 hours later, I was still in the same sleeping position. Someone had turned off my camera. Someone had been in my house again while I was looking at the screen. I barely made it to the bathroom before I threw up. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't possible. But it was. The evidence was there, undeniable. I called work and pretended to be sick. I couldn't face the outside world. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving my house unprotected. I spent the day investigating security systems, paranormal phenomena, anything I could explain what was happening. As the night approached, I prepared for the worst, but this time my mailbox was empty. Somehow that was even scarier. They had broken up with me, or they were planning something worse. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I existed in a state of constant surveillance, surviving on caffeine and fear. I jumped at any noise. I inspected every shadow. I installed new locks. I placed security cameras in every corner. I even hired a private investigator. But nothing showed up in the videos. There were no signs of forced entry. There were no footprints, nothing. The days turned into weeks. No more photos came. But the feeling of being watched never went away. I lost my job. My paranoia made me erratic, unable to function. I pushed away my friends and family. Fear became my only company. And then, exactly 1 month later, the first picture, I found another envelope in my mailbox. My hands were shaking when I opened it, but this time there wasn't a picture inside, just a sheet of paper, a typed message. We see you when you sleep, we know when you're awake, we've been inside your mind, and now we come to take the paper. Slipped from my numb fingers. My mind tried to comprehend the words inside my mind. Come to take what? And then, as if my question was answered, I felt a strange sensation running through my body, a weight on my limbs, a mist descending on my thoughts. I tried to move, scream, ask for help, but my body didn't respond. The last image I saw before darkness enveloped me was my own reflection in the hallway mirror. My eyes were open but empty, hollow, and behind me, barely visible at the edge of the mirror, were a dark, featureless figure extending his shadowy hands towards me. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. The doctor said I had suffered a psychotic break, that I was found wandering the streets muttering about photos and shadows in the night. They showed me the security footage of my own house. In them I was walking asleep, taking pictures of myself, writing that final message. They told me that everything was in my head, that I had invented this mystery, this story of surveillance, and done to escape the monotony of my life. And as I sit here in this barren white room under the watchful eye of nurses and doctors, I almost believe them. Almost. But some nights when everything is quiet, I see something out of the corner of my eye, a movement in the shadows, a pair of empty eyes watching me, and I wonder what it was. All an illusion, or they just want me to think it was, because if it was real, if the observers in the dark exist really, they're still out there, waiting, watching, and someday they'll come back for me. The thought should terrify, but as sleep overcomes me, a strange calm takes hold of me. 'Cause now I know the truth. Now I understand. In this world of shadows and watchers of realities that are dying and minds that are fractured, there's only one thing I can be sure of. I'm not alone, and neither are you. The headlights in my rearview mirror were relentless. 2 bright eyes that hadn't stopped following me in the last hour. I squeezed the steering wheel tighter, my white knuckles, as I pushed my old vibe to the limit on the winding mountain road. It was past midnight, and I hadn't seen another car since I left the last gas station 50 miles back. No one except the vehicle that followed me since. At first I didn't think anything about it. On overnight trips it's common to share the road with other lone drivers like me. But as the miles went by and every turn I took was perfectly replicated by those headlights, an uncomfortable cold settled in my bones. I was returning from visiting my sister in Colorado, a trip I had taken dozens of. Sometimes I usually enjoyed these long drives, the solitude, the changing landscape, the time to think, but tonight every shadow felt threatening, every bend in the road, a possible ambush. I tried to rationalize. Maybe they were just going in the same direction. Maybe they were afraid of getting lost and they were using me as a guide. But deep down I knew it wasn't like that. Not with the way they matched my speed. They accelerated when they were I did it, and they braked in perfect synchrony. I considered stopping, but the thought of standing still, of becoming an easy target for whoever was in that car, made my stomach churn, so I kept driving my eyes, alternating between the road and the rearview mirror, watching those headlights that never got too close, but they didn't move away either as I ascended the mountains. A plan began to take shape in my head. I knew well these roads ahead there was a viewpoint. A wide area where the tourists used to stop to admire the scenery. If I managed to get there, I could face my pursuer or at least see who it was stepping on the accelerator. I tried to gain distance for the first time all night. The headlights in my rearview mirror got smaller. My heart beat with hope and fear. At the same time, the viewpoint appeared in the distance with a screech of tires. I turned sharply towards the rest area. I turned off the engine and lights in one movement. I crouched in. My seat breathing heavily. Waited. The seconds passed, each one feeling eternal, and then the headlights appeared on the curve. They slowed down as they passed in front of the observation deck. For an instant I thought they would stop. But they continued on their way, passing by, slowly moving away in the darkness of the road. I exhaled that my chest could finally expand. It had been just paranoia, a simple case of someone traveling in the same direction as me. But just as I was starting to convince myself of it, something made me freeze completely. In the distance the car made a U-turn. I was coming back. Panic exploded inside me with trembling hands. I put the key in the ignition. The engine roared just as the headlights lit up again. My rearview mirror stepped on the accelerator, leaving the Mirador so fast that the tires spat gravel. This time there was no doubt they were chasing me. The next stretch of road was a blur of hairpin turns and treacherous inclines. I took every turn as fast as I dared, the tires screaming in protest, but the other car was getting closer and closer. My mind was spinning at the same speed as my tires. Who were they? What they wanted? I tried to think of someone who might have reasons to. I was not able to do this to myself, but I had no enemies. I had no dark secrets. I was just an ordinary person, so why was it when I saw the lights coming in the opposite direction that my hope revived? Another car. The first one I had seen in hours. Maybe if my pursuer saw that I was not alone, it would stop. But when the oncoming vehicle became more visible, my hope died instantly. It was another dark sedan, identical to that was chasing me and was in my lane, was coming straight at me. I didn't have time to think. With a desperate jerk of the steering wheel deflected Gonzalez's rearview mirror. I saw it turn around and join the first one. Now I had two cars chasing me. This was no coincidence. My eyes filled with tears when I understood the truth. This was planned. It wasn't random. They were hunting me. My terror peaked when I saw the barricaded on the road. Two more cars were parked perpendicular, blocking the road. I had no escape. With desperate braking, my car slid in a chaotic skid. The world spun around me. Flashes of mountain lights and the thin guardrail that separated me from a precipice. With a metallic creak, my car crashed into the barrier and everything stopped. The silence was deafening. Dazed, I looked up through the windshield. Shattered figures approached, wearing dark suits, their faces hidden by the light of the headlights. The door of my car burst open. A man looked at me from above. Sarah Connor asked in a monotone. Blink, confused. What not? My name is Jennifer Ha. The man puckered. The teacher turned to another of the agents. Check the photo again. Another man approached holding a phone. Share the image with my face. Is not her, said the second man coldly. The real one must have changed cars. The first one sighed. Clean this up. That looks like an accident. We have to keep looking. Before I could ask what that meant, I felt a prick in my neck. A cold sensation ran through my body. The man's voice sounded distant, like an echo. I'm sorry, miss. He's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then everything went black. The text message glowed ominously on my phone screen. I know what you did last summer. My heart skipped a beat as I read those words, a chill running down my spine. It wasn't a typical horror movie phrase. What troubled me was the fact that I couldn't remember what I did last summer. Nothing. I'm Ben, a 28-year-old software developer who lives in Seattle. My life has always been pretty normal. Wake up, go to work, come home. Repeat. But everything changed the day I got that message. At first I thought it was a joke. Maybe one of my coworkers was playing with me. I tried to laugh about it, but something in those words tormented me. Swipe from last summer. There were a lot of pictures from spring and then a jump straight to fall. Summer. The whole thing was blank, as if someone had taken a draft and deleted it from my restless memory. I replied to the message, "Who are you?" The answer came almost instantly. Someone who Knows the truth. Meet me in Volunteer Park near the water tower today at 8 p.m. Come alone. I shouldn't have gone. Every instinct told me it was a bad idea, but the uncertainty, the emptiness in my mind, he pushed me forward in the evening. I found myself walking through the park. My hands were buried in my pockets to hide his trembling. The water tower rose in the distance, an imposing silhouette in the gloom. When I approached, I saw a figure standing in his shadow. It was a woman. His face was hidden under the hood of his jacket. "Come," he said. As soon as I got closer, it was not a question. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you know about last summer?" She took off her hood, revealing a hauntingly familiar face, and yet I couldn't locate it. "I'm Alex, and I know everything about last summer, because I was there with you." My mind staggered. I didn't remember her for a single moment. "I don't understand it. I don't know you." Alex smiled sadly. "I know, that's the problem. Something they did to us. They see something that we prevents me from remembering." The fear tightened in my chest. "Who did to us what?" Alex looked around cautiously. "No, here, it's not safe. We have to go somewhere else." Against my better judgment, I followed her. We ended up in a small motel on the edge of town. As soon as we entered the room, Alex ran to close the curtains and checked the smoke detectors for hidden cameras. "Well, enough is enough of mystery. Speaks," I demanded, feeling the anxiety squeeze my chest. She inhaled deeply before saying, "Last summer you and I were part of an experiment, a research study on a new memory-enhancing drug." Suddenly a fleeting image flashed through my mind. A lab men in white coats. The prick of a needle in my arm worked too well. Alex continued, "We started remembering things we shouldn't." "What things?" She shook her head. "I'm not sure. Every time I try to concentrate, it slips away from me. But I know it was a big thing. Something they didn't want anyone to know." Another image flash in my mind, alarm ringing, running down a dark hallway, Alex holding my hand tightly. "We escaped," murmuring, "being a chill run through me." She nodded gravely. "But they caught us. They erased our memories. They made us forget all summer." My head was spinning. "How you know all this?" Alex sighed. "Little by little. Some memories have been coming back. I've spent the last year trying to find the others." The rest of us were 5 in the experiment. I already found 2 others. But he paused, swallowing hard. "They're dead. They see accidents." My skin stood on end. "Then we're in danger." Alex nodded gravely. "And they're tracking. How they implanted a chip in us." She pointed to her side here, just under the ribs. My hand automatically slid to the scar on my side. I had noticed it months ago, but I never knew how I did it. Alex took a small device similar to a taser out of her purse. "It's an electromagnetic pulse. If I use it on you, it will burn the chip." "And how badly is it going to hurt?" She just looked at me without giving me time to react, pressed the device against my skin and activated it. It hurt like the hell. The pain ran through me like liquid fire. I felt my whole body burn. My vision darkened and my throat closed in a mute scream. But then the memories came back like a broken dam. The memories hit me with all their force. The laboratory, the experiments, the feeling of my mind opening up to something bigger than I could ever comprehend. And then the horrible, unimaginable truth. A truth that no one should have. I opened my eyes trembling, sweat soaking my shirt. "God," murmur laughing. It rang out. Voices shouted orders. They had found us by the back door. Whispered to the grabbing his bag. We ran off just as the front door crashed against the wall. Gunshots rang out behind us as we drove through the dark parking lot. My heart hammers in my chest. My legs were moving by pure instinct. We found a car hidden behind a garage in ruins. While Alex was starting it, I looked in the rearview mirror. Several silhouettes emerged from the darkness with flashlights and guns in hand. They were coming for us. "Now what?" did I ask with a broken voice. Alex pressed the steering wheel tightly. "Now we found the others, and we exposed the truth." The car roared and darted towards the dark road. The lights of the black E-subs grew in the rearview mirror. They were chasing us, however. A strange determination filled my chest. We were no longer mere victims. We had been chosen to know the truth, and we would not come until we exposed it. Electricity flickered, plunging the house into an instant of darkness, and in that split second I saw a small figure at the end of the hallway, her face pale, illuminated by an impossible light. My heart stopped, flickered. When the lights came back, she was no longer there. It was at that moment when I knew that the nightmare didn't stay alone in my dreams. It had crawled into my world. "My name is Megan. I am 32 years old and I'm an elementary school teacher, or at least I was 3 weeks ago. I took a leave of absence from work because I haven't slept well in months. Not since the dreams began. It's always the same, a long dark hallway, at the end a girl in a white dress, her dark hair covering her face. I try to walk towards her, but the hallway seems to lengthen, as if I could never reach her. And when I finally get it, I don't want to get it. I do when I'm close enough to see her face. She wakes up screaming, and I too at first attributed it to stress. Working with children can be exhausting. Dreams were nothing more than my mind playing tricks on me. But when they started to be every night, I started to worry. Nothing stopped them. I took sleeping pills. I tried meditation. I even hung up a dream catcher that a colleague gave me. Nothing worked. The girl in the white dress was always there, always waiting, and every time I reached for it, I woke up drenched in sweat with the scream trapped in my throat. My director noted my exhaustion and suggested I take a break, so I went back to the house where I grew up. My parents were on a cruise for their anniversary. I had the house to myself. I thought a change of environment would help me, and for a few days it seemed to work until the night the lights flickered and I saw her standing in the hallway, not in my dreams, but in reality. The next day I went through old photo albums. Maybe my subconscious remembered some girl from my childhood, something buried in my memory, but then I found the photo. An old Polaroid taken in front of my house in the 70s. In it, there was a girl in a white dress standing looking into the camera, but her eyes were blurry, as if something didn't want them to see me. I turned the photo over with trembling hands. There was a name written in my grandmother Elizabeth's shaky handwriting, 1972. I didn't know any Elizabeth in my family. My mother was an only child. My grandparents also didn't have any other siblings, so who was she, and most importantly, why was I at home that night? I didn't sleep. I stayed in the living room, with all the lights on, hugging my legs to my chest. Every creak of the house put me on alert. It's not real. It can't be real. But then, at midnight, the air changed. It became colder, dense. A shiver ran down my spine, and then a sound, a whisper, a slight childish giggle. My skin stood on end. I got up with my heart hammering in my chest. The sound was coming from the hallway of the place where I had seen her the night before. I swallowed. Elizabeth. My own voice trembled as I pronounced her name. For a moment nothing. Then a dull tap, as if someone had moved something in the hallway. I slowly advanced, my heavy breathing. The hallway was dark, but at the back, just where I had seen her the other night, there was something on the floor, an old and dusty teddy bear. I bent down carefully, and I picked it up. The fur was threadbare. The button eyes barely attached to the belly, embroidered with faded threads, a name, Elizabeth. My heart skipped a beat. I turned the bear in my hands with a growing sense of panic, and then a soft voice whispered right behind me, "You found it." I froze. I couldn't move. I knew that if I turned around, if I saw her straight ahead, something terrible would pass. The air became more cold. Icy fingers brushed against my arm. "Now you can help me." I mustered all my courage and spun around, and there she was, the girl in the white dress, but this time I could see her face. Her eyes were huge and dark, full of sadness. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her voice came out in a shaky whisper, "I don't want to be here anymore." My fear was replaced by something deeper, compassion. She wasn't a monster. No, it was a specter that wanted to hurt me. It was just a girl trapped in a place where I didn't belong. I swallowed hard. "What happened to you, Elizabeth?" She lowered her gaze, holding the teddy bear to her chest. "I hid when the fire started." Her voice trembled, "and they never found the fire for me." A memory buried in my mind woke up suddenly. The fire of 1972, the one that almost destroyed the house when my mother was a little girl. I'd always been told there were no casualties, but that wasn't true. Elizabeth died here, trapped, forgotten. My throat closed. "How can I help you?" She looked at me with eyes full of hope. "Tell them where I am." A strong shiver ran through my body. Tears itched in my eyes. "I won't." Elizabeth smiled, and then it began to fade, as if I'd never been there. Only the teddy bear was left in my hands, and the feeling that for the first time in decades the house was at peace. Then experts found the remains in an old sealed basement under the house. Reports confirmed what Elizabeth had told me. She died hiding in the fire. The news was in the newspapers. Her family, who had believed she disappeared without a trace, were finally able to give her a dignified burial. That night I slept soundly for the first time in months. No more nightmares, no more dark hallways. Just silence, and just before I woke up on the edge of my sleep, I heard a soft, quiet whisper. Thanks to the low hum of the engine, was the only sound that broke the pre-dawn silence. As I turned into my driveway, exhausted after another night shift at the hospital, and then I saw it, the same dark sedan parked across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the dim street light. I had been there every night of the last week, always in the same place, always quiet and motionless. At first I didn't think much of it. Cars were parked on the street all the time in our quiet suburban neighborhood. But as the days passed and it never moved, a growing uneasiness began to settle in my stomach. I stayed in my car with the engine running. Looking at the sedan, there was someone inside. The windows were too dark to see through, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My hand floated over the gear lever, ready to back up and what to go. Calling the police was being ridiculous. It was just a parked car. I took a deep breath, turned off the engine and got out. The fresh morning air hit my face, bringing with it the scent of freshly grown grass cut and spring flowers. Everything seemed normal Pacific, even. But as I walked to my door, I could feel the eyes riveted on my back, piercing me from those tinted windows inside the house. I went about my usual routine after the shift, taking off my shoes, leaving my bag, heading straight to the shower, but every movement felt mechanical, like my mind was still stuck outside, in the street, in that car under the hot water. I tried to rationalize my fears. Maybe it was a neighbor's guest. Maybe someone had a problem with his car and was waiting for a trailer. But deep down I knew those explanations didn't fit. The car was too new, too clean to be broken, and had been there too long. After the shower, wrapped in my robe, I peeked through the blinds. The sedan was still there, and then I saw a small, barely perceptible movement. The driver's window was lowered an inch and then back up. Heart sped up. There was someone inside. Someone was watching me. I spent the day in a state of paranoia and exhaustion, jumping with every noise, checking the street through the blinds every few minutes, but the car never moved. At nightfall I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers with shaking hands. I dialed the number of the police. Would like to report a suspicious vehicle. I described the car, its location, and how long the operator had been there. Sounded calm, almost bored. The vehicle has violated some parking law. Someone has gotten out of the car and approached your property. No, but sorry ma'am, but we can't do anything with a legally parked car. If you notice any suspicious activity, please call us again. I hung up feeling helpless and silly. Of course they wouldn't do anything. What was I expecting? Someone to come and arrest someone for the crime of parking that night? I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the car door opening, a figure emerging, approaching my house. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, surrendered. I sat by the window and watched the street. It was quiet, bathed in the orange light of the lanterns. The dark sedan stood there, imposing, lurking. Then in the distance headlights appeared. Another car was approaching slowly, passed by the sedan and stopped a few meters ahead. Nothing happened at first, and then the door of the new car opened from it. A tall man dressed in all black, even in the distance could see that he was corpulent, that his movements were precise and calculated, approached the sedan and leaned towards the driver's window. There was a short exchange too low for me to hear, and then the man stood up and looked straight at my house. I pulled back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would come out of my chest. I had seen myself. I waited a few seconds, then I peeked out again. The man was gone. The other car was driving away, but the sedan was still there. The next morning I called work and said I was sick. I couldn't leave. I couldn't leave my house, not knowing what was going on. I spent the day guarding the street, fearing that at any moment someone would get out of the sedan and knock on my door at sunset. I finally saw movement. The door of the sedan opened, but instead of the man in black came out, an ordinary-looking middle-aged woman stretched out, walked around the car, and then went back in. It all lasted less than a minute, but it was enough to confirm my worst fears. Someone lived in that car that night. I called my brother. Someone is watching me. I let out my trembling voice. I told him the whole car, the woman, the man in black. There was a long pause. You've been sleeping good, eating well? Asked. A stroke of betrayal pierced me. I'm not crazy, sighed. Look, I know it's been hard since Mom died. Working night shifts doesn't help either. Maybe you should with someone I didn't understand. Come to my house and you'll see the car for yourself. Well, I'll be there tomorrow. The next day my brother came. I dragged him to the window. Look, there he is. All their time. Peeked out and frowned. That black sedan. You're sure it's the same? Of course I'm sure. It stayed a couple of hours, but nothing happened before leaving. He put a hand on my shoulder. Take a few days off. Visit Dad. Rest. I didn't have energy to argue, but that night I went back to my lookout post, and then I saw her. The woman got out of the car, but this time she didn't just stretch. She turned around, looked straight at my house, and raised her hand in a greeting. I stumbled backwards, my breathing erratic. She had seen me. She knew she was watching her. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. We see you, Sarah. We've always seen you. It's time to come home. And then I heard the click of a key on my lock. I slowly turned. The door to my house was opening, and there standing in the doorway was the man in black. Hi, Sarah. said in a serene voice. We have to remind us the first time I noticed something was missing in my apartment, I ignored it for sure. I left it somewhere else. The second time I stopped to think maybe I'm too stressed, but the third time when I got home and my favorite cup had disappeared without a trace, I knew something was terribly wrong. Someone I was breaking into my house, but instead of stealing things of value, they were erasing my life piece by piece. I am Olivia, a 29-year-old graphic designer. I work in an advertising agency. I spend too much money on coffee, and I spend my weekends watching crime documentaries. My life was normal until it started to disappear. It all started on a Tuesday. I was in a hurry to go to work when I noticed that my favorite pen was missing. Instead, it was a black pen with my name engraved on it, a gift from my grandfather. It was always on my desk, but that morning it had vanished. I checked bags, drawers, to the floor. Nothing. In the end, I gave up. It will appear later, but it didn't appear. A week later, another object disappeared. A pillow embroidered with the phrase from my favorite book. I had used it the night before. Now I just wasn't there. I searched every corner. I even checked the fridge. Nothing was. At that moment when the chill ran down my spine, something wasn't right. I'm not forgetful. I don't have pets. I live alone. So who was taking my things? The real alarm went off when it disappeared. My favorite mug was a unique piece of pottery bought at an art fair that night. After a tiring day, I wanted to make myself an umbrella tea at dinner, and the space where it should be was empty. I stood there feeling an emptiness in my stomach. This is not normal. I went all over the apartment from top to bottom. No signs of forced entry. No open windows, but someone had been here and was taking my things. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed up with all the lights on, listening to every creak, every sound. The next morning I called my landlord and asked. I also installed a hidden camera in my living room. I felt like I was overdoing it, until I checked the recording and saw something that made my blood rise. My pulse quickened as I fast-forwarded the recording. The black and white images showed my living room in the middle of the night. At 2:47 in the morning, a shadow slipped inside the frame. My fingers twitched over the keyboard. Was a human silhouette, but he didn't pick the lock. He didn't enter through a window. He was simply there, moving with total familiarity around my home. He walked to the piss and took a picture frame, a portrait of my best friend and I at his wedding. He held it for a moment, as if I recognized him, and then, without hesitation, he took it away, disappeared from the frame as silently as it had come. My hands trembled when I backed the recording, waiting to see a face, waiting to see who was stealing pieces of my life. But when the figure turned for a second towards the camera, my breath cut off, because the face I saw on the screen was mine. I jumped out of the chair, away from the computer, as if the image could hurt me, but the recording was still there, and the person in the video was me. Every gesture, every little movement was identical to mine, but it couldn't be. I was asleep in my room when this happened. My mind tried to find a logical explanation. Sleepwalking, a mistake in the recording, someone who looks like me, but no answer made sense. My reflection on the screen was frozen in that instant, my own eyes staring at me, empty, expressionless, as if it wasn't really me. A chill ran through my whole body. What the hell is going on? I forced myself to take a deep breath. Calm, Olivia. There must be an explanation. But as I looked at the frozen image of my own face on the screen, I knew there was no logical explanation. I hadn't been awake that night. I hadn't taken that picture. But there I was in the recording, moving with the same familiarity as I would in my own home, as if that other I thought this apartment was also. It belonged to her. A deep cold settled in my chest. This wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a stalker. It was something much worse. Someone was taking my place. The next day I went to work feeling like a ghost. I couldn't concentrate. Every time I saw my reflection on a screen or in a mirror, I felt like I couldn't trust what I am or what it is. I spent the day checking paranormal forums, looking for answers to questions I didn't know how to formulate. Among all the absurd stories I found, there was one that made me stop. It was about parallel universes colliding, cases in which people claimed that small details of their lives changed for no reason, a glass that was suddenly in a different place, a scar that had always been there and then didn't. Or the most disturbing, people seeing versions of themselves in places where they shouldn't be. I felt a lump in my throat. That's what's going on. There was another me, living in my same space. My stomach churned. If it was true, if she was here, so what about her version of me in her world that night? I decided I couldn't keep ignoring what was going on. If there was another me, if we were really colliding from two different realities, I had to face her. 2:3 in the morning, I sat in the living room with all the lights off and my laptop recording waiting. My heart was pounding in my ears. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I would do if she showed up, but I couldn't keep watching my life disappear piece by piece. I had to know the truth, and then I saw her. My stomach turned. The hallway door opened slowly, and there I was, or someone identical to me, but there was something wrong. She moved precisely without hesitation, as if she knew exactly where everything was, as if H was already lived in this place. Her skin was pale in the dim moonlight, and her eyes didn't reflect the light, dark voids. I had a hard time finding my voice. "Who are you?" I whispered. She stopped for the first time. She seemed to notice that I was there. Slowly, she raised her voice, head, and smiled. A shiver ran through my whole body. "You don't understand it, right?" said my reflection in a voice identical to mine. "This is not only your home." Her smile widened. "It's mine." My blood froze too. "No." She bowed her head. "We're superimposing two versions of the same world. They can't exist in the same space." She took a step towards me. "Only one of us can stay." My body, is she paralyzed? She took another step, and then I understood. She wasn't taking my stuff. She was removing my traces to replace me. Whispers filled my head. Two realities, two lives, but only one could exist. Me or she had to decide, and fast. 3 in the morning. I don't remember exactly what happened next. I just remember that I ran. That we struggled. That I screamed and forged with a version of myself in the darkness of my own home, and then there was a flash of white light, as if reality was torn apart for a second, and suddenly she was no longer. 8 in the morning. I woke up on the floor of my living room, dazed. Everything was in its place, the picture, the pen, my favorite cup, as if they had never disappeared. I woke up staggering, with my stomach turned. I went to the mirror. I looked at myself. My reflection was there. It was me, but in the back of my mind a question drilled into my brain. I'm the right version. The universe adjusted, one of us disappeared, but I'd never know for sure if it was me who won. The security camera flickered and came to life, its grainy image filling the monitor in front of me. At first all I saw was an empty hallway, lit by the dim emergency light. Then a shadow moved across the screen so fast I almost missed it. My heart rate quickened as I leaned closer, trying to focus on the image. That's when I saw him, a barely visible figure standing at the end of the corridor. He wasn't moving. He wasn't making any sound. He was just there watching me, and somehow impossible, I knew he was looking directly at me. My name is Mike, and I've worked as a night security guard at the office's Oak Ridge for the last 6 months. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays the bills and leaves me plenty of time to write my novel, or at least that's what I thought, until tonight. The night had started like any other. I arrived at 10 p.m., a day shift relief, and settled into my usual routine, rounds every hour, watching TV without much interest. The building was always disturbingly quiet at night, with just the hum of the air conditioning and one of the occasional creaks of the structure to keep me company. Was on my 2 a.m. round when I noticed something wasn't right as I walked down the 3rd floor. A chill ran down my spine. The air was colder than normal, but no, the kind of cold that air conditioning brings. It was a chill that felt in my bones. I shuddered, telling myself that the heating was probably, but then I heard it. A whisper so faint that I was almost convinced that I had imagined it. I had myself in dry, holding my breath, silence, and then again, "Mike, help us." The sound was faint, as if it came from afar, but my name was clear. I quickly turned my flashlight, sweeping the empty hallway. Hello. Nothing. Only the echo of my own voice. My hand trembled as I raised my radio to call the guard of static backrest, a harsh, distorted noise. I tried to change channels, not at all frustrated, and with my heart beating in my ears, I went back to the security room. "I'm getting paranoid," I said to myself as I poured myself a cup of coffee. Then I looked at the security cameras. Most of the monitors showed empty hallways as usual, but one kept transmitting an image clear. The camera on the 3rd floor. There was the dark, motionless figure looking directly. I frowned my eyes at the camera, convinced it was a system error. When I looked again, it was gone, but the feeling of unease remained. I spent the next hour staring at the screens, waiting for the figure to come back. Nothing. At 3:03 in the morning, I decided to do another round. I needed answers. As soon as I left the office, I felt it again. The air was thick, heavy. Every step felt like I was walking through invisible cobwebs, and I was cold, much colder than before. My flashlight was shaking in my hand as I walked slowly down the 3rd floor hallway. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified, and then I turned the corner, and there was the figure standing at the end of the hallway, tall, too tall. His silhouette was blurred, as if it was made of smoke, in constant motion. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but my body, he didn't obey me. He was paralyzed. The figure began to move. He didn't walk, he didn't slide, he dematerialized. He spoke, his voice, no, it wasn't just one, it was a chorus of whispers. "Mike, we need your help." My throat was dry. I tried to speak, but only a broken sound came out. Finally I managed to murmur, Who are you?" The figure twisted as if the question affected her. "We are the ones who can't be forgotten. Trapped. You must help us." The terror me. I was wrapping around, but a spark of compassion ignited inside me as I asked quietly. The figure raised an arm and pointed to the end of the hallway. "The truth is in the archives. Find it, set us free, and then it disappeared." I staggered back to the security room, my heart still pounding in my chest. The thought of staying another minute in that building made me want to run away, but I needed to know the truth. I turned on the computer and looked up information about the Oak Ridge complex. What I found took my breath away. The building hadn't always been an office complex in the 60s, it was a pharmaceutical research lab. They were experimenting with new drugs and people, missing patients, workers who never came home, hidden accidents, hundreds of lives erased from the records. But the worst was in a confidential document, a secret project, an attempt beyond death. They had succeeded, but not as they had hoped. They created something or someone, a failed experiment, a group of souls trapped in this place, unable to leave. The ritual that had trapped them was in the archives, and also the way to reverse it that night. I did it. I read the incantation. I spoke the words of liberation. The air turned cold. The whispers became a roar, and then silence. They were gone at last. They were free when dawn broke. I quit my job. I couldn't stay in that building, not after what I had seen. As I walked to my car, I felt something strange. Lightness, as if the building was no longer laden with invisible presences, as if the weight of decades of suffering had dissipated. But sometimes at night, when the world is calm, I still hear the whispers in the wind. Not pleading, but thankful. And I know that somewhere beyond our comprehension those souls finally found peace. The floorboards creaked behind me with my hand halfway to the light switch. I was alone at my best friend's house, or at least I was supposed to be. Slowly, I turned around with my heart pounding in my chest. There, trimmed in on the threshold of the bedroom, there was a figure I didn't recognize. Before I could scream, it disappeared, leaving me with doubts about my sanity and the true nature of my friend's haunted house. I'm Alex, a 25-year-old freelance writer with a penchant for the supernatural, at least in fiction. In reality, I've always been a skeptic. So when my best friend Jamie asked me to take care of her house for a week while I was in the hospital, I didn't think twice. I was on vacation. I didn't give importance to his half-hearted warning in jest about the house and its ghosts alone. "Don't be scared if you hear strange noises," he said with a laugh as he handed me the keys. "This old house has a mind of its own." Sometimes I rolled my eyes, and I promised him that I would keep his non-existent ghost company. What I didn't know was how those words would haunt me again. The first few days passed without incident. I spent time working on my comput, enjoying the peace and quiet of Jay's cozy suburban house. It was a great contrast to my small apartment in the city, and I found myself envying its spacious rooms and well-kept garden. It was on the fourth night when things started to get strange. I was up late, fighting the blockage of the writer, when I heard a soft knock upstairs. As if I wanted to drop a book, I stopped, my fingers suspended over the keyboard. Jay didn't have any pets, and I was sure I'd closed all the doors and windows. "It's just the house settling down. You murmur upstairs." My heart started pounding. I stood up, grabbing my phone and the heaviest book I wanted. I could find it as a makeshift weapon. Slowly, I climbed the stairs, every step echoing in the silence of the house. The upper hallway was dark with elongated shadows cast by the half-open doors. "Hello," I called in a trembling voice. "There is someone there." No answer, only the oppressive silence of an empty house, or so I hoped. I checked every room, turning on the lights and looking in every corner. Everything seemed in place. There was no sign of intruders. By the time I finished my search, I had almost convinced myself that it was all in my imagination. Almost as I turned to go down the stairs, a movement caught my attention. I turned suddenly, and it was then, when I saw it. The figure in the doorway was there only a second, a shadow darker than the surrounding darkness with a vaguely human form, but somehow wrong, and then disappeared, leaving me with a wild heart and a mind full of questions. That night, as soon as I slept, startled the creaking and moaning of the old house. By morning I became convinced that it had all been the product of too much caffeine and too little sleep. But deep down a seed of doubt had been planted. The next day passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I walked into a room, I felt that I had just lost sight of something or someone. At nightfall my nerves were on edge. I decided to call Jay. only to hear a friendly voice. But just as I reached for my phone, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. "Great," you murmur, whisper so faint that I almost missed it. "Alex," I turned suddenly, holding my breath. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. Another whisper, closer this time. "Help us." I backed away, crashing against the wall. My hand fumbled for the light switch. I acted in vain. "This isn't funny," I said, my voice rising. "Whoever you are, show yourself suddenly." The room turned cold, so cold that my breath condensed in the air in front of me, and incredibly a figure began to materialize in front of me. At first it was blurry like smoke taking, but it slowly solidified into a young woman's silhouette. She was pale, with blurred edges, and I could see the wall behind her through her translucent shape. She wanted to run, scream, but she was paralyzed, my eyes wide with disbelief and terror. The ghost, because what else could it be, looked at me with sad and empty eyes. "Please," said her voice, resounding as if it came from far away. "You have to." I managed to help us babble, as in response more figures began to appear. Men, women, children, all with the same ethereal appearance, all wearing clothes from different eras, filled the room, their whispers rising in a desperate chorus. "Help us, deliver us, find the truth." I closed my eyes, wishing it was all a dream, but when I opened them, the ghosts were still there, looking at me with pleading eyes. "What do they want from me?" I whispered. The first apparition, the young woman, gave a step forward. "We are trapped," he said, "united to this house by a terrible curse. You must find the source, break the bond, free us." "But how do I know nothing about curses or ghosts, or the answers are in these walls?" interrupted a spectral old man in the spaces between long-buried secrets. "You must look beyond what you can see." Before he could ask any more, ghosts began to fade, their forms dissolving like mist in the sun. The last to disappear was the young woman, whose sad eyes remained even after the rest of her had vanished as suddenly as she had left. The electricity came flooding the room with light. I stood there trembling, trying to process what I had just experienced. A part of me wanted to run away from this house and not look back, but a bigger part, the one that had always been drawn to mysteries and the unknown, I knew that I didn't. I could leave not now, for the next 2 days. I immersed myself in the search for the secrets of the house, reviewed old documents that Jamie kept in the attic, researched the history of the property online, and even examined every corner of the house for hidden compartments or secret rooms. Little by little a grim picture began to emerge. The house, according to records, belonged in the 19th century to a man named Ezra Blackwood, a wealthy eccentric with a dangerous obsession with the occult. Sometime in the 1870s, Blackwood performed a ritual that, in his own words, would grant him immortality, but something went terribly wrong. Instead of prolonging his own life, Blackwood sealed the souls of everyone who died on the property inside the house, trapping him. These spirits had remained captive, reliving his last moments, and again. The key to breaking the curse, according to Blackwood's diaries, was to reverse the original ritual. For this I had to find the artifact that he used, a small ornate box that, according to the texts, had been hidden somewhere in the house. As the sun went down on my last day taking care of the house, I finally found it behind a loose brick in the fireplace. I discovered a small cavity that it contained, a dust-covered box. It was made of dark wood and carved with symbols I didn't recognize. With trembling hands I opened it. Inside there was a single scroll, covered in fine and twisted writing, the ritual of reversal. As soon as I began to read the words aloud, the temperature of the room plummeted. The ghosts reappeared, more solid, this time their faces a mixture of hope and fear. The air became dense, charged with an energy impossible to describe. As I uttered the last word, a reaper light filled the room. I heard the screams of the spirits, but not of pain, but of relief. When the light faded, they had too. I stood in the old house with the empty box in my hands, wondering if everything had been real. Had it really been released, a century of trapped souls, or what had been released? I had imagined everything just then. The front door opened. Alex J's voice echoed in the hallway. I arrived ahead of schedule as it was. I all looked at the box in my hands and then into the empty room. How could I explain what had happened? In the end I decided that some secrets were better left untold. Everything was fine, I replied, hiding the box behind a cushion. Just a quiet week in a perfectly normal house. As I went to say hello to Jamie, I couldn't help but smile. The house felt lighter, as if it had been relieved of a great weight, and although I knew I would spend the rest of my life questioning what really happened that week, one thing was for sure: I would never see the old houses in the same way again. The shrill ringing of my phone broke the silence of my apartment, waking me up startled, blinking. With my eyes narrowed blindly on my bedside table, squinting at the bright screen, my heart skipped a beat when I saw the caller ID. It was my own number. With a trembling hand I answered the call. What I heard on the other end froze my blood. It was my voice, but not entirely distorted, distant and charged with a terror that made me shudder to the bone. Emily, whispered the voice in desperation. Listen to me. You're in danger. They're coming for you. Don't trust. The line was cut off. I stood there in the dark with the phone pressed to my chest, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. It had to be a joke, right? An elaborate hoax with a voice modulator. But deep down I knew it wasn't. The fear in that voice had been too real. Sleeping after that was impossible. I passed by my apartment, startled, creak and shadow. When it finally dawned, I felt a slight relief. Surely in the daylight I could find a logical explanation for what had happened. But then strange little things began to happen. At first my coffee maker turned on by itself and began to brew coffee. Although I had not programmed it, the TV turned on, only showing nothing more than this, and when I checked my phone, found dozens of missed calls, all from my own number. At work I couldn't concentrate. My mind was repeating on loop the warning from the night before. They're coming for you. Don't trust. Who were they that I shouldn't trust? When I left the office that afternoon, my phone rang again. My number this time. I hesitated before answering. Who you are? I demanded, trying to control the tremor in my voice. Emily, please, begged my own voice. You have to listen to me. They found a way to get through the calls. The line was cut again that night. I barely slept. Every time I fell asleep, my phone rang, jolting me out of sleep. But when I answered, I only heard static and sounds that gave me goosebumps. The next morning things got worse. I started to see things, fleeting shadows out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was my imagination that was the result of lack of sleep, but then I saw it clearly in the reflection of my computer screen. At work it was me. But it wasn't me. This version of me seemed exhausted, with an expression of absolute terror and eyes full of secrets. I left work early, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. As I walked to my apartment, my phone vibrated. Without, I ignored them all. It was when I got to the building that things became truly scary. As I approached the entrance, I saw myself. I was standing inside the lobby wearing the same clothes as me, but her eyes were bulging with panic. She moved her lips as if trying to tell me something. She couldn't listen. I froze. I couldn't process what I was seeing. The other Emily pressed his hand against the glass door, his face reflecting despair, and then in an instant it disappeared. I shook my head, trying to collect my thoughts. This can't be real. It's not possible. But then I looked at my phone. The missed calls were still there, all from my own number. The images on my laptop screen, the way my reflection in the office had been me, but not me. Everything pointed to a unique and terrifying conclusion. This was happening, and it was real. During the following days I threw myself fully into the investigation. I searched paranormal forums, scientific theories about parallel universes, and accounts of similar experiences. At first everything seemed like a tangle of conspiracies and pseudoscience, but among all that information I found something that made me stop. A document about a failed experiment in quantum communications. The experiment had not been made public, but someone, an anonymous whistleblower, had leaked details about the side effects, distortions in reality, sightings of double objects appearing and disappearing for no apparent reason, people claiming to have talked to themselves. My blood froze. My other self wasn't lying. Whatever these scientists had done, I was tearing through the barrier between worlds, and I was there. The screen with a mixture of fear and determination. My own number. I took a deep breath and answered. What to do, I said, before the voice on the other end could speak. There was a moment of silence. Then my own voice whispered, we must close the gap. My chest tightened. How? Connecting with the other versions of us, finding the missing piece. The missing piece, I repeated, confused. The key is in the first call. In what I tried to warn you. I tried to remember. Don't trust what I shouldn't trust. One asked. Urgently, the static filled the line. Then a single distorted and almost inaudible word. My skin stood on end. The who, but the line was cut. I looked at my reflection on the black screen of my laptop, my own face staring at me with a tense expression. Something in my stomach turned. Who is he, and what does it have to do with it, all this? I just sat in the dark of my apartment with the phone still clutched in my hand. That single word echoed in my head over and over again. Who was he? Someone I knew, a scientist behind the experiment, or worse. Fear beat in my chest like a second heart, but stronger than fear was the need for answers. The next morning I decided it was time to quit of reacting and starting to act. I took the day off from work and re-immersed myself in my research, searched archives, forums, for any mention of the breakdown of reality. The more I read, the clearer it became that this was not an isolated accident. There were other cases, people who had noticed changes in their lives, people reporting calls from their own numbers, distorted voices warning them about something. Most of them, they disappeared without a trace. A shiver ran down my spine. That's what awaits me. My phone vibrated with a new notification, a message from my own number. Don't go to work tomorrow. Trust me, my mouth dried. I didn't answer, I didn't know if I should, but something inside me told me that I should listen to it. That night I checked the security recordings of my apartment. I had left my laptop recording with the camera activated. While I slept I didn't expect to find anything, but when I advanced the recording at 3:12 in the morning, my blood froze there. In the dim lighting of my room, I saw the silhouette of someone standing next to my bed, watching me. I couldn't make out his face, but the outline of his body was identical to mine. My hands trembled as I fast-forwarded the video. At 3:15 in the morning the figure leaned over my sleeping face and then, without moving, real mind, without taking a single step, disappeared. I closed the laptop suddenly. My stomach was churning. What's going on? The message from before was still on my phone, flashing on the screen like a silent warning. Don't go to work tomorrow. My other eye was trying to protect myself from something. And for the first time I began to believe that the real threat didn't come from the other end of the phone, but from this world. I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow in my apartment, he made me jump. Every creak of the building put me on alert. As soon as the sun started to rise, I decided to leave the house. I couldn't stay there waiting for the unknown. But where to go? Don't go to work tomorrow. The message kept burning in my mind. My other self was warning me. If danger was in, I needed answers before I risked going back, so I went to the only place where I could find them, the company that conducted the experiment at 99:30 in the morning. I found myself in front of an anonymous office building in the center of the city. It was discreet, with no signs, no indication of what was being done in there. But I knew what it was after hours. Researching the night before, I had found its name on multiple documents: Quantum Link Technologies, those responsible for the collapse of reality. I took a deep breath and I entered. The lobby was elegant and cold, with an empty reception desk. I tried to act like I belonged there, walking confidently into the main hallway. No one stopped me. I moved forward until I found a door marked as restricted access. I tried to open it, but it was closed. I looked around. A woman in a lab coat walked past me, scanning her card at the reader. The doors opened. I seized the moment and slid me down a hallway lit with fluorescent white lights. If he was right in here, I'd find the truth about him. 10:15 in the morning, Quantum Link Technologies lab. I hid behind a filing cabinet while two scientists were talking. The gap is expanding, one said nervously. More identity crossings are happening. We know it. The other replied, the problem is not the gap, so what is? The man lowered his voice. He is already here. My body is. He tensed. I knew who they were talking about, the one with the warning, the real threat. But who was it? I held my breath as the scientists continued their conversation. The others, and they're trying to contact each other. My stomach flipped, and they meant me. My mind was going 1,000 miles an hour when I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. I turned just in time to see a shadow move by the reflection of the crystal. Someone was coming towards me, and worst of all, the shadow had the same silhouette as me. I turned slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure at the end of the hallway was me, but not quite. Her skin was paler, her eyes darker, and her smile crooked, unnatural. "Hello, Emily," said my other me, in a hauntingly familiar voice. "We finally met." Terror paralyzed me. "Who are you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I am." You answered, or rather the version of you that managed to cross first. My hands trembled. Cross from where everything started, from where everything started, from where he found me first. Something in his voice made me shudder. Who is he? His smile widened. A parasite, a being that feeds on the fissures between realities, uses us as doors to continue expanding. My mind staggered. Then it's here. My other self bowed his head. NBR is inside you. The air left my lungs. Not since the first call, since the first interference. He found you, he whispered, and now he's settling down, waiting for the exact moment to take control. A chill ran through me from head to toe. How we stop him? His smile disappeared. There's only one way. He took an object out of his pocket, a small silver device. This seals the fissure and cuts his connection with you, he said. But only there's a problem. One of us stared at me. It won't survive. My stomach churned that. What does that mean? Only a version of Emily can exist in this world, she whispered. We must decide who stays. The ground seemed to sink under my feet. My other self squeezed the device, ready to choose, and before I could answer, the light flickered, reality distorted, and everything went black. When I woke up, I was in my apartment. The sunlight was gently down through the window. My phone was on the table. No missed calls, no messages from my own number. I ran to the mirror, stared at myself. It was me, the only version of me. But then I saw something on the coffee table, a small silver device with a note next to it for emergencies. Don't lose it. My breathing quickened. Was I the one who survived, or worse? And yes, he was still inside me. I wouldn't know until it was too late.